Was his father a National Socialist? Did he like the Nazis?
Sí, era nazi también.
Yeah, he was also a Nazi. Yes. Yes.
An officer stands in the burning rubble of Berlin. His mission, not to fight, but to get the Führer out alive. He succeeds, and for 30 years he keeps the secret. But on his deathbed, he leaves one final clue. A map. A map that supposedly shows the exact route, the U-boat's landing spot, and the final safe house. When historians got this map, they didn't wait. They went straight to Argentina. And what they found there is more shocking than the escape itself. Operation Second Sunrise. Berlin, April 1945. The city was a living nightmare. It was a hellscape of smoke, fire, and the endless deafening thunder of Soviet artillery. The Red Army was no longer at the gates. They were in the streets, fighting block by block. The 10,000-year Reich was collapsing in a matter of days. But deep underground, over 50 feet beneath the burning city, something else was happening. You see, while the world was focused on the battle, a secret plan, years in the making, was finally activated. In the cold, concrete maze of the Führer bunker, this wasn't about a final, desperate defense. This was about escape. The plan had a code name, Operation Second Sunrise. Its goal wasn't victory. That was long gone. Its goal was continuity. The plan was to preserve the Reich's leadership, its most secret technology, and its massive stolen wealth far, far beyond the reach of the Allies, and the man directing this secret operation wasn't a general. It was the man who really ran the Reich, the man in the shadows. His name was Martin Bormann, the Führer's private secretary. And get this, Bormann was the ultimate survivor. He controlled all access to the Führer. He controlled the party's bank accounts, and now he was controlling its escape. Working right beside him was a logistics officer, a man whose name has been scrubbed from history, a man who decades later would claim he was the one who drew the map. While the city above was pure chaos, down in the bunker, it was all business. The officer described a strange, eerie calm. He said you could smell the concrete dust, the sweat, and the fear. But in Bormann's private office, maps were spread across heavy oak tables. These maps didn't show troop movements. They showed red pencil lines tracing escape routes. Routes that went south toward Bavaria, through neutral Switzerland, and into fascist Spain. Couriers, risking their lives, moved through the U-Bahn tunnels, dodging Soviet patrols to get to hidden makeshift airstrips on the city's edge. Publicly, the Führer was still on the radio, a frail voice raging about fighting to the last man. But privately, he and his inner circle were packing their bags. In early April, the officer received his new orders. They were classified top secret and came from Bormann himself. His job, oversee the evacuation of essential archives and personnel. At first, he thought it was just another crazy, doomed military order. But then a second coded message arrived. It contained just one sentence. The future of the Reich will not end in Berlin. That was the wow moment the officer finally understood. This wasn't a defense. This wasn't about saving the city. It was about saving them. The crazy part is, the evacuation had already started. The officer was given a new list of priorities. This list didn't include soldiers or weapons. It included gold bullion, stacks of forged passports, crates of priceless stolen art, and dozens of heavy boxes labeled medical equipment. The officer noted something strange. These medical crates were guarded by elite SS troops, and no one was allowed to inspect them. One night, under the cover of artillery fire, the officer followed a guarded convoy. It moved slowly through the rubble to a nearly destroyed airfield. Under a few weak floodlights, he watched as the medical crates were loaded onto a Junkers Ju-52 transport plane. The plane's manifest listed its destination simply as Operation Serpent. When the officer asked Bormann's adjutant what Operation Serpent meant, the man just smiled. He looked at the burning sky and said, "It's for after." But here's where the story gets even wilder. Researchers now believe there wasn't just one escape plan. There were three. Plan 1 was Bormann's, the financial escape. Get the money out, get the leadership out, and rebuild in a friendly country like Argentina. Plan 2 was Gestapo Chief Heinrich Müller's plan, a plan of pure deception. Create fake bodies, plant fake evidence, and let the leadership disappear into the shadows, possibly to live inside Allied countries using fake identities. And Plan 3. This is the one that gives people chills. It was the SS plan. To take the Reich's most secret technology, the Wunderwaffen or wonder weapons, and continue the war from a new secret location. What was in those medical crates? The officer claimed it was gold, but other reports from that night are insane. They talk about blueprints. Blueprints for the new flying wing jets, for long-range rockets, and even for the Reich's atomic bomb program. Some even whisper that the most priceless occult items, like the Spear of Destiny, were crated up and flown out that night. While the generals argued and the officers drank, Bormann was in his own airtight chamber, calm as ever. He was just signing papers. But these weren't military orders. These were financial documents, papers that would later be found in Swiss banks and Argentine corporations. Bormann knew the battle was lost, but he believed the idea, the organization, and most importantly, the capital, could live on. He told the officer, "Men's death does not end empires. Empires die when memory does. We will be there to keep it alive." Then came April 20th, the Führer's final birthday. The propaganda cameras were rolling, showing him one last time, a frail, trembling man patting the cheeks of teenage soldiers in the Chancellery Garden, a pathetic staged photo op. But what most people don't realize is what happened just hours later, the real history. The cameras were off. Deep underground in a smoke-filled room, a different meeting took place. It was the Führer, Bormann, and Gestapo Chief Müller. According to the officer's later account, this was the meeting where the plans merged. Bormann laid it all out. He didn't talk about wonder weapons or final victories. He talked about continuity. He presented his plan, and it was already in motion. Bormann had maps. Maps that didn't show battle lines. They showed flight paths to neutral Spain. They showed secret refueling stops in the Canary Islands. They showed naval routes for ghost submarines pointing to one specific isolated coastline, Patagonia, Argentina. Bormann had already prepared safe houses funded by his invisible empire. He had names, contacts, and bank accounts ready. He just needed the final go order. The Führer, listening in silence, finally looked up from his own map and uttered a single word: proceed. The officer was immediately reassigned. His new job, to use his SS units to guard the entrance to Tempelhof Airfield. A special passenger was already waiting. From a bombed-out rooftop, the officer watched Berlin burn, and he finally realized the truth. This wasn't a war for survival. It was a cover for the greatest disappearing act in history. Years later, he would say, "That week, the Reich did not fall. It merely moved to a different continent." But this officer was more than a witness. He was a participant, and he was keeping his own records. He was the man who held the map, a map that didn't just point to South America, it pointed to the ice. The voyage to the ice. Long before the first Soviet soldier entered Berlin, Martin Bormann was building his invisible Reich. He understood that armies could be beaten, but money was forever. With enough cash, an empire could live on. So here's the deal. Bormann began siphoning off the Reich's finances as early as 1942. We're talking billions of dollars in stolen gold, art, and war profits. It flowed into neutral Switzerland, Spain, and Portugal, funneled through hundreds of front companies on paper. These companies were set up to sell post-war reconstruction materials. In reality, they were the financial foundations for a Reich in exile declassified Allied intelligence, later confirmed this. By 1944, German capital was flooding Argentina at record levels. One OSS report, that's the old name for the CIA, called Buenos Aires a financial lifeboat for the Nazi elite. But Bormann wasn't just moving money, He was moving people. He had lists of scientists, SS officers, and engineers. Their documents were forged, their identities changed. Bormann's order was simple: keep the knowledge, keep the capital, and keep the power. But how do you move the world's most wanted man across an ocean controlled by your enemies? A plane couldn't fly that far. The Allies controlled the skies. Bormann needed a different route. He needed the ocean. This led to the war's strangest and most secret naval mission, Operation Seawolf. As the Reich crumbled, the oceans became its last refuge. Bormann and the head of the Navy, Admiral Karl Dönitz, put a new plan in motion. They selected a special list of submarines. These weren't just any U-boats. They were stripped of their torpedoes and ammunition. The empty torpedo bays were refitted to carry watertight containers, special passengers, and secret documents. Engineers even installed hidden compartments lined with lead to try and disguise their metallic signature from Allied sonar. Officially, these U-boats were Germany's last line of defense. But in truth, they were escape pods. Among them were two submarines that would become infamous: U-530 and U-977. Both of these U-boats vanished in the final days of the war. They completely ignored the Reich's official order to surrender. For months, the Allies just assumed they were lost, sunk to the bottom of the ocean until they reappeared, thousands of miles away. On July 10, 1945, a full 2 months after Germany had surrendered, U-530 slowly surfaced off the coast of Mar del Plata, Argentina. Its crew surrendered quietly, but the Allies were stunned. The boat was empty. The crew had no weapons, they had no ship's log, and they had no good explanation for where they had been for 2 months. Allied interrogators grilled the captain, Otto Vermuth. He answered every question except one. When they asked him who else had been on board before they reached Argentina, he refused to answer. Then it happened again. In August, another ghost submarine appeared at the exact same port. U-977. Its captain, Heinz Schäfer, also claimed his men had just fled Norway, unwilling to surrender, but his story was even crazier. He claimed they had traveled for 66 days underwater. That was far longer than the submarine's known endurance. Investigators suspected the truth. These subs hadn't been hiding. They had been on a mission. They had already delivered their passengers and cargo, dropping them off on the remote, empty coast of Patagonia before they surrendered at Mar del Plata. But here's where the story takes a turn into the truly wild. What if U-530 and U-977 were just decoys? What if the real escape was happening on a third submarine? You see, by 1945, the Germans had a new weapon, the Type 21 Electroboot. This was the world's first true submarine. It could stay underwater for weeks. It was faster underwater than most Allied ships were on the surface. It was a ghost. And the officer's map? It didn't just show a line to Argentina, it showed a line that went south, way south. It pointed to Antarctica. This is the theory of Base 211. What most people don't realize is that in 1938, the Reich launched a massive secret expedition to Antarctica. They claimed a huge ice-free territory called Neuschwabenland, or New Swabia. They mapped it, they explored its warm water caves, and they planted their flags. Then, they supposedly started building. The theory goes that Base 211 was a massive secret U-boat base built under the ice shelf, a last refuge for the Reich. The officer's confession described Operation Seawolf as a two-stage plan. Stage 1, the U-boats would leave Norway and Spain loaded with cargo. This cargo wasn't just gold. Rumors persist that this is where the Reich's most prized occult objects went: the Holy Lance, the Ark of the Covenant, items they had hunted for years. Stage 2. The U-boats would travel to Base 211 in Antarctica. They would drop off the real assets, the top scientists, the Wunderwaffen blueprints, and the most important cargo. After refueling at the secret ice base, the special passenger would then be taken on the final, shorter leg of the journey from Antarctica to the coast of Patagonia. Does that sound crazy? Yeah, about that. When the captain of U-977 was interrogated, he was asked why his ship's log was gone. He gave a chilling answer. He said he had destroyed it because it contained secret information about refueling that the Allies should not have. Refueling where? In the middle of the empty South Atlantic? The officer's testimony put the final piece in place. He said one submarine, the advanced one, was committed from the Canary Islands to the South Pole before heading to Argentina. At first, we were not sure why, he confessed, but then we saw the maps of New Swabia. It was the New Berlin, the city of ice. Those ghost submarines were the bridge between a dying empire and a new invisible one. And the officer, he was the one who helped draw the route. The man who never was. For decades, the world accepted the story of the Führer's final moments. We all know it. April 30th, 1945, the bunker in Berlin, the sound of a single gunshot, the loyal guards taking the bodies of the Führer and his new wife, Eva Braun, up to the Chancellery Garden, dousing them in gasoline, setting them on fire. It was the perfect dramatic end to a monstrous story. The Soviets even claimed they found the remains, a jawbone and a piece of a skull. For over 70 years, that was history. But here's the catch. It was all a lie. In the late 1970s, a frail, elderly man emerged from the shadows in South America. He was a former SS logistics officer, a man the world thought had perished in Berlin. He was ready to talk, and his confession was so detailed, so shocking, that it tore the official story to pieces. "I was there," he said. "I helped him leave Berlin alive. The death, it was theater." His story began in mid-April. Bormann summoned him for that top-secret mission, Operation Serpent, the secure transport of a special passenger. The Führer wanted control, the officer explained, even over his own legend. He planned his death with the same detail he planned a battle. The plan was a double switch, a conspiracy of deception. According to the officer, the Gestapo had found two body doubles. What most people don't realize is that the Gestapo had a man. His name was Gustav Wähler. He was a low-level clerk who looked so much like the Führer that he was used as a decoy multiple times during the war. The officer claimed Wähler and a woman of similar build to Eva Braun were kept under guard in a sealed-off section of the bunker. When the end came, the plan was simple and brutal. The imposters would be brought to the Führer's private rooms. They would be eliminated. They would be dressed in the Führer's and Eva's clothes. Their bodies would be the ones carried up to the garden. Their bodies would be the ones burned. A handful of loyal witnesses were chosen. They were told exactly what to say. They were ordered to tell the world they saw the bodies, to tell the story of the final act. It had to be perfect, the officer recalled. The world had to believe it, no doubts. They even had a dentist on standby to fake dental records to match the body double's jaw. And get this, the Soviets fell for it completely. Desperate to prove their victory, they grabbed the charred fragments. They hid them in Moscow's archives for decades, treating them as a state secret. But science, unlike history, doesn't lie. Years later, when those secret remains were finally tested, the truth came out. In 2009, researchers were given access to the skull fragment, the one with the bullet hole, the one the Russians had labeled Hitler for 60 years. DNA tests were run. The crazy part, the skull belonged to a woman under the age of 40. It was not Eva Braun, and it was definitely not the Führer. The jawbone fragments? They didn't match his well-documented dental records. The entire proof of the bunker story, the foundation of history, it was a fake. The officer's confession explained why. While those loyal witnesses were watching the fake funeral pyre, the real escape was happening. On the night of April 30th, as Soviet troops were just a few blocks away, a coded message was sent. The Eagle is ready to fly. The officer with a small elite SS troop led the way. They moved through the U-Bahn tunnels, then surfaced onto a deserted, bombed-out street. Two armored trucks were waiting. Inside one, a man sat in the shadows. He was wearing a simple military coat, his face hidden by a hat. He was silent, the officer said, but when I saluted, he lifted his hand and I could see the tremor. I knew it was him. The small convoy raced through the ruins to Tempelhof Airfield. A Junkers Ju-52 transport plane was waiting, its engines already running. The officer supervised the loading of the last medical chests, sealed files, and a few personal suitcases. Just before boarding, the man in the coat turned. He looked at the officer and at the red glow of his burning capital. He said softly, "This is not the end for Germany." A moment later, the plane was gone, vanishing into the night sky, flying west. The officer's story matched perfectly with declassified OSS files. Those files show a mysterious, unscheduled flight that did leave Berlin on April 30th, a flight that Allied radar tracked heading toward northern Germany before it disappeared. The plane, the officer said, landed in Spain. There, under the protection of General Franco, who owed the Reich for helping him win his own civil war, the special passenger was taken to a secret remote monastery to wait for his U-boat. But here's the wildest theory of all. What if the Allies knew? What if the US and the UK knew he escaped and let it happen? Think about it. The war in Europe was ending. The new war, the Cold War, was just beginning. The new enemy was the Soviet Union, and the Reich had one thing the Allies needed desperately: scientists. This was Operation Paperclip. The US was grabbing every rocket scientist, doctor, and engineer they could find. The officer hinted at a deal. The old man would be allowed to disappear. In exchange, Bormann would hand over the Wunderwaffen blueprints and the lists of scientists. It was a trade. Silence for science. And there's one more theory. A theory that puts Martin Bormann at the center. What if the man who escaped wasn't the Führer? What if the Führer did end his life in the bunker, but Bormann, the ultimate puppet master, pretended he escaped? What if Bormann, who controlled all the money, faked the escape? He could then move to Argentina, tell the secret SS network that the Führer is alive and in hiding, and use that lie to control the entire Fourth Reich and its billions in cash. The officer's confession was the story, but the map was the proof of what really happened. He was the man who held the map, and it would lead to a new world. Hitler's children. By the end of the war, Argentina was more than just a neutral country. It was a sanctuary. It was a safe house built for ghosts. You see, behind its public face of neutrality, Argentina's government had a secret. Its leader, Juan Domingo Perón, had a deep, and some would say, financial admiration for the Reich. He had spent time as a military attaché in Mussolini's Italy and was impressed. This led to a web of secret pacts, covert deals, and political favors. These deals turned the southern tip of the world into the last secret stronghold of the Third Reich. And Bormann, the spider at the center of the web, had been preparing this route since 1943. The SS officer's confession lines up perfectly with what historians later uncovered. Bormann's agents, the ones who ran his invisible Reich, had created the escape routes. They were called rat lines. And the most important one wasn't the one through Italy. It was the one through Spain to Argentina. The money, Bormann's billions, had arrived first. It was laundered through Swiss banks and then invested in Argentine companies. On paper, these firms exported grain or imported machinery, but in truth, they were just pipelines for Nazi wealth. The officer recalled seeing the shipping manifests. They were marked Wolf's Route, the Wolf's Route. They charted a clear path from a U-boat base in Germany to a stop in the Canary Islands or Antarctica, and then a long, silent run to the South Atlantic. We had maps not of battlefronts but of harbors, the officer said. Ports that didn't exist on any official charts, just coordinates. So, when those ghost submarines U-530 and U-977 surfaced at Mar del Plata, the world was shocked. But to the people on the inside, like Bormann and Perón, it was just business as usual. It was the plan working. Bormann's network relied on a few key men on the ground. The most powerful was a man named Ludwig Freude, a wealthy Argentine industrialist and a very close friend of President Perón. Führer was the fixer. He secured thousands of blank visas. He bought property. He arranged political protection for the new arrivals. In return, the new arrivals brought their technical expertise. And all that money from Bormann's banks. One 1946 intelligence report estimated that over $800 million in Nazi assets entered Argentina, disguised as post-war investment. That's billions today. But the officer's testimony was even more sinister. He said he wasn't just a planner in Berlin, he was also an escort. He was on one of the final ships. He claimed that on May 6, 1945, he supervised the disembarking of special passengers from a ship under total radio silence. Among them, he said, was a man in a gray coat and a wide-brimmed hat, surrounded by SS guards in civilian clothes. They were all silent, the officer recalled, but when one of the local helpers reached out to shake the man's hand, the man just raised his arm instead, slowly. No one had any doubt who it was. Over the next few years, the locals in Bariloche noticed the new arrivals. They were strange. They kept to themselves. They paid for everything in cash. They built huge isolated estates deep in the woods, far from the road. The areas around Bariloche, places like Villa La Angostura, became known for their high fences and heavy security. Locals talked about midnight deliveries, armed guards, and sometimes they could hear old German marching songs drifting from the woods. But Analco wasn't the only safe house. The officer's map showed more. It showed a whole network. One of the first stops, according to rumor, was the Hotel El Eden in the town of La Falda. This luxury hotel was owned by a German couple, Ida and Walter Eichhorn, who were fanatical supporters. They had reportedly raised millions for the Reich. Declassified FBI files confirmed that locals reported seeing the Führer staying at this hotel in 1947, waiting for his Patagonian compound to be finished. This was the new Reich, and it was getting crowded. The officer's map allegedly showed how the network called Die Spinne, the spider, functioned. It was a web of money and protection, and it wasn't just for the Führer, it was for all of them. Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust, lived openly in Buenos Aires. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death, practiced medicine. They all used Bormann's money, and they were all protected by Perón's government. Bariloche was their capital. It was a place where SS officers could live, surrounded by friends, and never have to answer for their crimes. But the officer's confession held one final, shocking secret about the life in Argentina. A secret that, if true, is the most terrifying what if of all the Führer and Eva Braun. They were married in the bunker. The officer claimed Frau Fischer, Eva, was with him at the Analco compound, and that they had children. This theory is explosive. Locals in the area have long told stories. Stories of two daughters born in Argentina. Stories of a woman who looked just like Eva, seen pushing a stroller in the private gardens of the estate. The officer claimed Bormann's network created new identities for these children, sending them to be raised in other countries to protect the bloodline. Is it true? It's the most guarded secret of all. The officer's confession was the story, but the map was the proof. He was the man who held the map, and it would lead to a final hidden grave. Outro. So, what's the real story? Was the officer's map the final confession or the ultimate piece of disinformation? Let us know what you believe in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more hidden history.